I hope to focus, as we said at the beginning of this this discussion, on community champions at work. And we have among our panelists people in education, people in advocacy, and art. And so we'll be focused on those three powerful arenas and the work that these folks are doing as advocates and educators and as artists. As Mark mentioned, I am new in my role at BYU. I've been here for just less than a year, moved to Utah from New York City in February. And as he also mentioned, this is the first time that we have begun to organize as a university campus-wide around sustainability and stewardship. So I'm privileged, fortunate to have this role as the sustainability director at the university. There's been incredible support. And given our mandate to educate and inspire and engage students, we really hope that in the short time that we have them with us as students, that we can influence their behaviors and attitudes as they go forth into the world as alumni and as community leaders and as family members and members of their wards and stakes, that they can continue to share with the world what they've learned at BYU and exemplify positive behaviors around sustainability and stewardship. In a similar way, we hope that all of you watching this session around the world can take away a few things from this session that will help you influence those around you as you go forward in your day-to-day activities. So, Sarah, I'm going to start with you because you're one of the first people I met when I moved here to Utah in February. You reached out to me in your capacity with the Utah County Sustainability Coalition. Can you tell this group, tell this audience what that coalition does, and maybe some of the progress you've seen so far?
Sure. So the Utah County Sustainability Coalition is something that was established in March of 2019. It was an offshoot of the Utah Valley Clean Air Task Force, which has been around for several years now. And I was really inspired by the work that they were doing, their ability to collect representatives from governments around the county, and as well as the transportation and real estate, the universities. So because this is something that obviously requires some cooperation from a lot of different stakeholders. So I was interested to see if we could perhaps expand the conversation beyond just clean air, because that foundation had been established well. I was hoping that we could further talk about all aspects of environmental sustainability, especially considering the projected population growth here in Utah County, and how we can continue to grow well together. But obviously this requires people to actually come together and have those conversations. And as has been mentioned before, kind of some of the politicization, love that word, of the environment is something that we do have to contend with. And so kind of the goal of this sustainability coalition for me is to essentially just serve as a forum where we can normalize those conversations, that we don't have to see it as taboo when we use the word environment, but that it can be something where we can find a lot of common ground. And I think we're making some progress in getting some more representatives from various counties. Again, it's still young, but I'm looking forward to getting expanded representation throughout the county and have those urban and suburban and rural voices represented, and how we can approach environmental sustainability together.
Great. Yeah, Sarah, you've done such a great job with the coalition so far, and you've literally given me and BYU a seat at the table. We've come and been able to meet with representatives from other cities, and to also have representation from our neighbors at Utah Valley University, just up the road there as well at UVU. With that, this might be a good opportunity to bring in Daren to the conversation. Daren is a professor at Utah Valley University, or UVU. This is the second time that he has worked with the university to help build a sustainability program. And Daren, if you're there, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your recent experience at UVU and some of the progress that you've witnessed there since taking on that role in building a sustainability program.
Yeah, so at UVU, I've only been here for a few years. I actually came from North Carolina and actually helped with their sustainability programs there a lot as a part of their geoenvironmental studies program. I'm currently actually the hydrologist here for our earth science and environmental science program. And so I'm part of their sustainability committee. I'm more interested and I'm more part of their water subcommittee, where I actually try to help with water conservation, since that's one of my main focuses. And to me, it's really important, especially in times of drought like now, to actually really help people understand the importance of conserving and being more sustainable in our water resources. And so we've tried with marginal success to actually try to help our campus community, especially to understand the importance to actually reduce their water resources. I know the committee itself, the whole committee as a whole, the sustainability committee, has been working really hard at lowering our energy output. We've been the university is actually just bought a large solar farm that they're actually getting energy from, and things like that to try to reduce that. But my main aspect of sustainability there at UVU is really trying to get the students involved and try to really activate them in some way. I teach a lot about that and teach a sustainability class there at UVU, and it's always fun to see them, their eyes light up and all get excited about understanding the environment better and doing things that will help them to be a better steward. And so I think that's one of the most important things that I do as an activist, is really to try to help others to see the same light. I mean, I probably am not the best in the world to actually go out and say, hey, go out and battle climate, but I'm trying, and I think the best way that I can do that is through my students.
Thank you, Daren. We're going to come back to that topic of student engagement. So, Rachael, are you there?
I'm here. I apologize for my camera. It showed up this way this morning. I figured a ghostly image was better than nothing.
Okay, well, we can see you through some sort of foggy glass. That's okay. Yes. We're glad you're here with us. Now, Rachael, as Mark introduced you, we understand that you have experience with city planning, but also, as a city planning commissioner, but also with some of the artwork that you've done. And I wonder if you wanted to focus on one of those first as sort of an introduction, and tell us some of the progress you've seen with your efforts.
Well, so as a fiber artist, a lot of what I do is practical in nature. I don't have anything that's gone to any shows, as some of my colleagues have done, but I focus mainly on stuff that I can do for myself or for my students. So I teach at a Waldorf school, which has its own background, but there is a high emphasis on practical learning as well as the other learning. And I currently am teaching third grade, where they learn crochet, and they learn as part of their main lesson work with their main teachers where wool and yarn comes from, which is from a sheep typically, but there are other places. And so one of the things that I have been doing as an art piece is I have been collecting over the years scraps of yarn that children have used in their work that we have ordered. And I've been breaking that down and respinning that into a recycled yarn, mainly for their benefit, so that they can see what you can do, not only with the raw material that comes from the sheep, but also from little leftovers. And I actually have spun all the yarn. I haven't knitted it up. I've got a plan for that, but it's very, they always get very excited about it, because they realize, oh, just little things can add up to make a big project. And it will be something that sort of has some symbolism to do with the school, but basically taking that material and turning it into art. And I've been able to create over 7 skeins, which, if you're a fiber artist, you know, but it's significant enough that I'm going to be making a shawl with that. And that's just out of scraps.
Well, Rachel, that's very fun. I hope that we can talk a little bit more about the power of art and how a hands-on experience like that can really engage young people. So again, the Q&A panel is the Q&A box is open. I'll be checking questions there, but let's start with one for all three of you, Sarah, Daren, and Rachel. Obviously, as organizers in your communities, you are activists, you are advocates, you are educators, you are artists, but you're also leaders. And one of the important principles of leadership is just simply listening. And I'm wondering if each of you could speak to for a moment to what you're hearing from the people that you work with, and if there's anything surprising. And Sarah, maybe we'll start with you.
So that's a lot of the work that I found when I started entering into this field. I realized that there was perhaps a disconnect again with the language that we're using and the political background. And so in my conversations with people in government specifically, I've heard either their perspective or perhaps what is getting filtered through them concerns again with environment and sustainability, and it's easy for people to stop listening on both ends because there is this disconnect. And so for me, I realized that the work that I'm choosing to spend most of my time on right now is environmental diplomacy, because I feel like that will be key to moving forward. If I move forward on my own, we're not going to make much progress, but we have to have these conversations and be willing to check our egos at the door, which can be challenging at times because we always want to be right. But if we can successfully check our egos at the door and come together and serve together, I think, again, the church aspect of it, from this background of the church service, that really faith is not passive, it's active, that we come together and we listen to each other. And so it's been interesting to hear some of the things that have come through that I realize, okay, we still need to make some progress on the conversations. And again, that's why I'm interested in developing this forum for normalizing conversations. But I think that we are making some progress. It might take a lot of patience and persistence, but I think there is progress. I don't have specifics for you because I don't want to take all the time, but I do agree that that willingness to sit down and have that conversation, which I think can be challenging these days with the pandemic, has exacerbated that. Where we've become isolated behind in our digital worlds, and we've got these barriers. So we need to be willing to bring those barriers down and look each other in the eyes and try to understand kind of the root at what they're saying. They might be saying something on the surface, but keep asking questions to find out what is the root value that is causing them to make these certain choices. And finding that root and finding that common ground is crucial to making that holistic progress.
Thank you, Sarah. So same question for Daren and Rachel. You're both working with younger people. Are you hearing anything surprising? What are you hearing from the people that you interact with at work or in your roles?
Bremen, I lost connection for a while. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So we're talking about the role of a leader is to listen, and Daren, you spend all day with other professors or students. What are they talking about when you're discussing stewardship and sustainability?
To me, I'll actually respond to this in partially in a way that one of the questions that I saw in the Q&A came up with as well, is that most students specifically don't know where to start. They don't know what to do. They don't know what how to actually make a difference. And to me, it is really, as a leader in that, is to really empower them to know that their small things, every single small thing that they do will actually compound, especially if you get others in part combined with it. And I mean that's really what they don't understand. I get notices from students all the time says, well, why does it matter that I actually do these things? Why does it matter that I actually recycle? Or why does it matter if I do that? If everybody else doesn't, why does it matter that I do? And the whole point is really to get them excited or get them inspired to actually make a difference. And if they just start off with those small steps, they can start building from there. And that's really what to me it is we all have to take knowledge of our those small steps first and then move from there.
That's great. Thank you, Daren. So Rachel, same question for you, and then we'll dive into the first question that's come in from the audience.
Okay. Well, I would say that as I was thinking about that question, a lot of what I get from my, not only third graders, but I also teach wood carving to middle schoolers, which is its own challenge. But it seems to be sort of a microcosm of what I hear from adults in a variety of formats, which is they get started on a thing. And a lot of times, especially with the children, they get really discouraged because they don't know how to do it. And so they say, I'm no good. I don't want to do it because I can't. And so the conversation that I have with the students regularly is about, well, this is new. You haven't done it before. It's going to take some time. We just need to practice, but you can do it. And look what you have done. And I find that having that kind of conversation at an age appropriate level, of course, you know, with my adult interactions also is a similar conversation. You know, people sometimes they start to realize the magnitude of the challenges we face environmentally. And they say, well, I can't do it. I can't do all those things. It's too hard. It's too big of a problem. And I find that the conversation comes back to that same thing. You know, what can we do? And you know, what can you do? You don't have to do all the things perfectly all at once, because this is a new thing and we're all learning together actually as we, you know, as the science comes in and we start realizing which strategies are effective and actionable, especially to scale. And so I think that's a really important part of it. The other thing that I've noticed as far as the listening component goes is that as I'm having these conversations, again, with the students, we talk as teachers a lot about meeting them where they are. And you can't meet them where they are without getting to know them. And it's the same with the people that I interact with in my adult interactions, which is you have to get to know them where they are and see what experiences they have, both in general, but also in the project that we're working on. I just did a knitting class actually for our young women's group. And there were different degrees of experience with the skill as well as the fiber and fiber care and things like that. And so taking the time to see where they're coming from, either on a political issue or on a practical, you know, how do I do this thing? And then adapting and meeting them where they are. And I think that's sort of the message for each of us is we start where we are, and then we pick up another skill or we learn another perspective and we add that to what we already know.
Yeah. Rachel, I'm going to put you on speed dial because that's a pretty good pep talk. I say the same things to myself. I've never done this before. This is hard. But that's a good confidence boost. So I'm excited. We have our first question come in here for the panelists. This one comes from Dr. Ben Abbott, psychology professor at BYU, one of my favorite people. He says, I find that most people want to make a difference environmentally. However, so many don't know what to do to get started. What would you recommend to someone who is just starting, particularly for people who are discouraged by the division and backsliding that can seem prevalent at the national level? Let's go back to Rachel, Sarah, and then Daren, if you have anything you want to add. I know you touched on this just a moment ago. We'll come back to you. So let's go Rachel first.
Well, I would say that you have to take bite-sized steps, you know, and you have to get out there. So when I did the recycling effort, that was my baptism into learning how government worked, actually. I didn't really know. I'd had recycling in another place and I'd come to a city that didn't have it. And I because we're a small town, actually, in the Salt Lake Valley, I ended up talking to the mayor and he said, oh no, nobody's going to want to. And after a year of finding other people's recycling bins to use, which wasn't very effective, but I went back and I persisted, and I ended up talking to my city councilor for my area, and he had some suggestions. But one of the things that I ended up doing was going to a city council meeting before I was ready to share my idea, because I had no idea what a city council meeting looked like. It was my recon. And what I learned was that in most cases, especially in mid to small towns, they don't actually get a lot of residential involvement unless there's some issue that somebody's riled them up about, or it's affecting their property. And there are good reasons for that, but usually most people are not involved. And so I would say, get involved in some way. And to be effective, that needs to have some sort of political aspect to it, because what I do is good for me, but to have that greater impact, we have to band together. And similarly, I think you start with like the small habits at home. You pick one. You pick one that's doable for you, that you feel is going to be meaningful. And once that becomes a habit in your life, then you pick another one. And don't get discouraged by, it's hard. I've been there frequently, but it's easy to get discouraged by the enormity of the problem. But you just take it one step at a time, and you add one thing at a time. And the small things do add up over time.
Thank you, Rachel. And the outcome, again, for anyone who missed your bio, is that you were recognized as the Individual Recycler of the Year award from the Utah Recycling Coalition. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So it worked out. And Dr. Abbott, thank you again for this great question. Sarah, let's go to you next. You've had a similar situation with your family and kind of measuring the amount of waste that you were producing in a year. Can you speak for a moment about what happened?
Sure. So again, this concept of, how vast a problem we've got facing us. But we obviously can't do all of it. So with that large stewardship landscape, really it's whatever you're interested in, whatever you initially have an interest in. And like Rachel was saying, you start with something and then you build on that. So several years ago, I decided to challenge our family. Well, really, it was just kind of collecting data initially to see how often we took our garbage bin out to the curb to get emptied. And I was already interested. My initial interest was in recycling and waste reduction. And so I was going to document how many times we took the bin to the curb. So the first year we did it, I think it was in 2010. This was for a family of 5. We took our bin to the curb 5 times that year. The next year we took it 4 times, so an average of once a quarter. Now, full disclosure, we have not been able to get back to that amazing, although compared to some who only create like a quart of garbage in a year, then it's a lot. But we need to recognize the baby steps that we're each taking, and then be encouraged in those baby steps that we're taking, and then we'll be prepared to take those next steps. So really, I mean, in one of my classes this quarter or this semester up at the U, we were talking about the different projects that perhaps the students were, different campaigns that they were designing, and really just fascinated by the different areas of interest. So one student I spoke to, she was interested in fashion, and there's plenty to do in that, addressing fast fashion, water, chemicals, working conditions. So, you can go from fashion to medical waste to food in schoolyards, edible schoolyards, and that kind of thing. So really there's something for you to do. There's something for me to do. We can't do it all, but there's plenty to do, and just find something that you're interested in and get started.
Thanks, Sarah. Daren, did you want to say anything else about just getting started?
Yeah, I wanted to cover two things, if that's okay. I know in Ben's question, he asked about specifically the political backlash sometimes you can get and things of that nature. I wanted to tell a story, if that's okay. And so when I was in North Carolina, the university that I was working at, we were asked by the state to do sustainability plans and to do carbon plans. And our chancellor and his administration basically came out saying that they did not believe in global warming, and therefore they won't do the plan. And so we as a faculty decided to, you know what, even though we have that pushback, we can still do things. And so we still actually designed our sustainability community. We still did things. In our classes, we did service learning, where we would have the students prepare a documentary and then have people come together and invite the community and actually have them. They're the ones doing it. I'm just sitting back and helping them, but they go out and actually invite people to it, get the leaders there, and even with the pushback, we still had progress, and I think that's important. I mean, we even got the university to save almost $1 million in energy over the 3 years that we were working there, even though the chancellor still didn't believe that was a thing. But as long as we can tell them, hey, if we can lower your bottom dollar, will you still at least work towards this? And they were okay with that. And so I think that we need to understand that they still have power. They still can do things. And even with that opposition, sometimes we can still move forward. You just have to be brave enough and to actually take a stand. And some people aren't going to like what you do, and that's okay. But you can still move forward and still do it. I think that's important for students to understand and see that they can do it. You just have to give them that avenue to be able to do it. And I think that's important.
Daren, did you say you wanted to make a second point?
Well, mostly, no, that's probably good enough. But mostly,
Okay.
I was just stating that you have to empower them in some way, right? You have to give them, give people sometimes an avenue to actually move forward, and because they're daunted by the pushback sometimes. They're daunted by the problem at hand. And so you need to give individuals or provide individuals with individual things that they can do. I remember one service learning project we did when I was there in North Carolina. We had students digging in the trash to actually pick out all the recyclables, right? And just take and put them into the actual recycle bin. The students didn't like it, but they understood what could be recycled, what can't be recycled. And they started and people would ask them questions, why are you going through the trash? And they could talk to them. And so it's this idea, and a lot of them afterwards, they thought it was gross at first, but afterwards they're like, you know what? That was cool. I was doing something, right? and it was also an experience for them. So it's just giving them those opportunities.
Thanks, Daren. Yeah, you had the floor. I just want to make sure we weren't missing out on a brilliant point.
That's okay.
We've had another question come in, and this one I think is for Rachael because it's about art. It kind of reminds me of a conversation that LDS Earth Stewardship hosted just this month with Dr. Paul Allen Cox, who was mentioning that when we are stewards of God's creations, we reverence the Creator. So this act of creation, he said specifically, if you love the artist, don't slash the painting, right? Such a great metaphor. So Rachael, this one's for you. How does art create a manner to reframe and re-envision the hope in activation? She says, so the question comes from Andy Pitcher Davis. Sorry, just read that name here. I too believe it's key to teaching others to re-see our world. Do you want to take that one?
Yes, it's actually, there's so many levels to this question. And part of it is the artist as a creator and engaging in that creative act, right? And so putting that, trying to create a vision of something and express that in a way that other people see. And the other side of that particular part of that is that when we see or experience art of whatever form, we can understand things on multiple levels, and sometimes in ways that words don't always reach, because it speaks to our emotions, as well as connecting concepts that sometimes to our logical mind may initially feel like they don't connect. They may seem paradoxical, but we start to see that there actually is a connection, and we start to find words that connect those. but it was that experience of the art that portrayed that. And sometimes it's also a way of showing a thing that we didn't see before, because like there's a phrase, you can't be what you don't see, but sometimes we don't see what we don't see. And so art gives us a medium to show a thing, whether it's something we don't want to have happen or something that we do, whether it's, you know, it's the hope or the caution or the feeling, whether it's in representing those disproportionately impacted communities and those, you know, the issues that they have to deal with, as well as the hope that we see. And so all of that can come together within art. And there's even, and I suppose this is slightly debatable, but there's sort of a newish field called craftivism, where you take crafts like knitting and crocheting and woodworking, all of these things, as a way of expressing your activism. And that may show up in an American flag sort of shawl that you wear, or it's a color, or it's a symbol that you've worked into something that you wear, or it's just a sculpture that you have created. And there are so many forms that that can take. But by bringing that vision together, you can express that in ways that people might not have seen before. And so they can envision that new concept or that new path forward through art. It's very powerful. And just the act of doing it helps you to meditate on that. Like with spinning is not a quick process. I will tell you that. Spinning yarn, not cycling, that's a different thing. But when you take yarn, and especially if you have to break it down, old yarn, and then recard it and reform it into a new product, and then that's just the yarn. You haven't even gotten to putting that into its final creation, which is in a finished piece that you could then display. There was an exhibit called A New Beehive that's in Ephraim now, but it was at the Salt Lake Community College, where they basically sent a challenge to a lot of different artists. And there was there was stained glass, there was actually yarn made out of paper, actually, speaking to recycling, but and a lot of different knitted and carved and all these different very tactile representations of how to re-envision Utah as a new kind of beehive. And there were some really beautiful and poignant, thought-provoking pieces that really made points that would be either long-winded and maybe you tune people out if you tried to put that into just a lecture, for example. So I think art has so many applications on so many levels, but mostly because it speaks to the heart.
Thank you, Rachel. We've had another question come in. Daren, I think you and I are going to sit out on this one. We'll let Sarah and Rachel answer it. What's the role of women in sustainability efforts? I'll just leave it at that. It comes from Christy Lehman. Christy, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name. Nice to see you. Sarah, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. I know the question had a lot of emphasis on kind of that personal accountability and sustainability at home. I'll speak to kind of the community aspect of it because I'm not a homesteader myself. That kind of has to be a whole family thing, and that's not quite our family dynamic, and that's okay. So I think as far as the role of women that I see in this conversation, it speaks to representation. And if those who are making the decisions are primarily one type of voice, we're missing appropriate representation for the community as a whole. And we've got some blind spots, and not that they're intentionally blinded, but yeah, again, like she said, a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. And so by expanding representation, you'll be able to kind of fill some of those gaps in understanding and policy making. And so that's I think one main role that women can play. And also in this concept of environmental justice, which is huge. Really, that requires a lot of different kinds of voices to knitted together moving forward with the goal to serve the human family even better.
Thank you, Sarah. And Rachel, if you saw the question in the Q&A box, there was much more to it, but do you want to add some commentary?
It's quite similar to what Sarah said. I think there's the representation as well as the lived experience. The environmental movement that has gotten the most attention has been largely dominated by white men. And I like white men, I'm married to one. But the fact is we have a different lived experience, whether we're women or people of color, different socioeconomic perspectives. And so if it's being run primarily by an affluent white male perspective, you're going to miss some important things. And that is why we need to have diverse representation, diverse lived experiences, so that we can make sure that we are looking at all of the issues, not just the ones that affluent white men are interested in or have noticed. And that's really, I think, the key to it, is getting more of that and giving voice to people whose voices have been marginalized or diminished because of it's always about power, right? And so the powers that be want to keep that power. And until we open that up to all of our perspectives and experiences, we're not going to get a holistic and equitable resolution to these issues.
Thank you, Rachel. Daren, I want to come back to you for a moment, because you and I are fortunate to work for large universities in Utah Valley. We spend a lot of time with young people, and that's what the next question centers around. It comes from Teresa Gomez. She says, I've noticed that college students and teenagers are concerned about environmental issues and are willing to take action. However, many of them feel intimidated or discouraged by their age, or feel somehow hopeless by the views on these issues from older generations. What can we do to encourage or empower them?
So, I mean, to me, I mean, you look at some of the individuals around the world today. I mean, there are a lot of youth who are actually making a difference. There are a ton of youth who are making a difference, especially in the climate realm. And I think that individuals, to me, they have the most to lose, and they need to really actually step up and understand that it will be scary. It will be hard, and it's sometimes hard to get them to others to take them seriously, but they just need to move forward and have that faith, in a sense, to act that they're doing what they need to do. And part of it, it goes back to what I think I said before, and it's just, we need to empower them to be able to see, or give them opportunities to understand that it's not as hard as it looks, right? And they can actually do something, and then have them start out small, and once they start out small, then they can go grow big from there. And they just have to have the passion, is what it comes down to. And it says, you try to help them instill that passion in them, and then they'll do wonders.
Great. Thank you, Daren. Just a reminder to anyone listening, anyone watching, we are taking questions, and deliberately decided as a group to cut down on sort of presentations and visuals and have this discussion. So we welcome those questions from the audience. So Daren, while you have the floor, I wondered, just looking again at your bio, you have several research focuses. One is hydrology, one is hydrogeology. Maybe just for my sake, can you tell me the difference between those two?
So the difference is the study of surface water versus the study of groundwater. Hydrogeology is how water and the earth react, and so on, how we can do it. Like one of my big research studies has been in North Carolina. Like I said, I've only lived here in Utah for a couple of years now, but in North Carolina, we actually lived amongst some of the largest CAFOs, confined animal units, like farms or factory farms in the nation. And so there was a lot of groundwater contamination and groundwater use in that area. So we actually, that's part of my research, was monitoring that use in the region, because the communities were really concerned that that using that much water and then putting back their effluent in the area was going to contaminate their water resources. And so we, as a whole, didn't find that happening, but we did find some contamination in some areas of the region. So it's really that monitoring and getting students involved of that to actually to really help them understand that our local economies, our local communities can be impacted by these impacts, and so these influences. So that's kind of the difference between that. I mean, here with my work here at for hydrology, I do more surface water, but I also do groundwater impacts here as well, looking at groundwater contamination and algal blooms on Utah Lake a little bit as well. But that's the difference there.
Gotcha, thanks. On that topic of water, I heard Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the UN, say once that rather than being, fiery, dominant as a leader, we can often act or look as water. Water is clear, it's colorless, often tasteless, and maybe considered very weak in that sense. And yet it's powerful enough to move earth, to douse fire, to carve vast canyons. And we see that nearby in the Grand Canyon here in the United States. Are there parallels to the gospel here and the efforts that any of you are doing around sustainability and stewardship? I'll open that to all three of you, Daren, Sarah, Rachel.
I'll start off today, and that's just partially because I have to speak tomorrow, and I had this topic in my mind a little bit about foundations, and I was listening to President Nelson's talk about the erosion of the Salt Lake Temple's foundation, and that's that slow erosion of that foundation. And I was thinking back to how if we allow that to actually slowly to some of these negative impacts and things in the world to actually eroded our spiritual foundations and things of that nature, that we can sometimes lose our faith, and we need to build up those foundations. And in the sense of back to climate is the same thing. And we have, even though we might be discouraged by these by naysayers or whatnot, we still need to just kind of do those small, simple things that will then build our foundations to what they should be.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah and Rachel. As community leaders, are there gospel concepts that really resonate with you and have some parallels to your efforts around stewardship?
Mine's similar to Daren's, and that's the small and simple things, and kind of bringing that into that internal work that we do. Sometimes it can feel discouraging when there's so many setbacks to accomplishing things that we know are important and we know are urgent. And we do need to make great efforts when we can, but we do also need to not run faster than we have strength. We need that self-care. And by the slow incorporation of that, we also are being that light unto the world. I'm giving all the phrases, but I have had over the years, as I've tried to live the things that I espouse, I've had people come up to me later, sometimes quietly, one-on-one conversations where they say, these things that you've done and you've kept doing, you reminded me, or whatever it is, that's made a difference in my life. I've made changes in my life just through that slow and steady building that up. And I think that comes from making that internal change. It's easier to see the external changes, but if we had enough people making those internal changes, that testimony, if you will, I hesitate, but that's, it's essentially that conviction and the compassion and those attributes that help us to make those changes in the world. As we build those up in ourselves, we naturally give permission to other people to do the same, and also show a way, because sometimes you think, I have to have a PhD in hydroecology or whatever it is. And I don't, but I can do lasagna gardening in my backyard. I can compost. I can learn how to make yarn from local sheep. I can diet with local plants or invasive plants that it's a benefit to harvest, things like that, and continue to talk about it. I think that's one of the biggest things is it has been so politicized, and it doesn't. The thing is that the issue isn't political. Climate change affects all of us, and if we can make it normal to talk about it, and we can talk about it from the different perspectives, like some of the conservative politicians who are concerned about climate, those are ones that I've been trying to give voice to show that it isn't just democratic issue or a radical leftist, whatever it is. It is something that affects us all. And so we just need to talk about it and make it normal to say, okay, I'm working on a farm to closet initiative, or a farm to table, or I'm going to eat locally, or I'm going to reduce my plastic consumption, whatever it is. All of those things build up, and you talk about it, and you find the most surprising responses from people who you didn't know were interested at all. And you find out actually they want to do something about that too. So talk about it.
Thank you, Rachel. Sarah, same question for you.
Yeah, so one of my favorite, when I think about this, one of my favorite scriptures is in John 17, when it's the great intercessory prayer. And the phrase that really stands out, and it's repeated in a couple of iterations, that they may be one as we are one. And this concept of unity and communal family through this journey of life. And that's the ultimate goal, is really, that we may be one. And so for me, when it comes to faith, sometimes I have a hard time. I don't see God, I don't see Jesus, but I can see you. I can see my family members. I can see my community members, the people in my ward. And so that makes faith a more present and tangible thing for me. If I'm struggling to feel that closeness to divinity, then I bring that layer of divinity to my everyday life and to the people that I see in every day. And that becomes a way that I can express my faith, is in the small interactions with the people that I meet every day, the family that I serve. And I think that's again, those small steps and those interconnections. And as we become more and more connected and create, from a weak connection to a little bit stronger connection to an even stronger connection, and the more of those that we can make, the closer we can to being that they may be one as we are one.
Thank you, Sarah. It looks like we have just about 10 minutes left. So if we have one or two more questions that anyone from the audience would like to ask, please put those into the Q&A box. And as we're having a conversation about conversations, let's talk about messaging for a moment. We've talked about speaking with those around us. Rachel, you and I were on the phone yesterday. I told you I was going to pick up my mom from the airport, and she's so sweet. So we sat in the car together and we talked about COP26 because she's interested in what I'm interested in, right? And so many other things we could have talked about with family and Thanksgiving coming up, but that's what we had our nice long car ride about. I'm just wondering, for anyone listening here, how do we begin to have more of those conversations with those around us? And maybe we could kind of think in terms of top line messaging. Are there one or two statements that have really worked for you in engaging people around this issue?
I don't know if I would say
maybe.
a particular statement.
Rachel, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I thought that's what you said. I don't know about a particular statement, but I think just staying aware of the different endeavors that other people are working on across the spectrum. And then you always have something to talk about, and then you can meet people where they are again. And then just reading books, listening to podcasts, all of those things will give you some of the current things that are part of the conversation and knowing where it's going, because the environmental conversation that's happening now is not the same as it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's changing. And if you can have that variety of lead-ins, then you can meet them where they are. So sometimes it's just a question of, hobby. Like knitting is actually a really easy one for me, because people are always saying, oh, I want to knit, or I want to do wood carving, but I don't know how, it's too hard. And so you can start with that. And then with that area of shared interest, you can then build into these other different things, like I'm doing with the fiber shed, or that, finding a local source for your yarn, things like that. And then that leads necessarily to like water management and animal management and land management, all of those things. There's a stepping that you can definitely step to any issue if you can start with that area of commonality.
Thank you. Sarah or Daren?
I'll say something here. So I think it's really comes down to staying excited about it yourself. I mean, I have sometimes people say, "Hey, Daren, what are you up to?" And then like, "Oh, I went to Geneva Steel the other day, and I was so excited. Look at all these pictures and all that kind of stuff." And if they see your excitement, they're like, "Well, why were you there?" I'm like, "Well, I'm studying the groundwater there." And so to actually just tell them and to explain it to them, and then they start asking questions, and you can talk to them about what they could do, and it really, you just have to have that excitement, right? And if, as long as you keep that up, and when you talk to people, just, I mean, just be it natural. I mean, if you naturally want to talk about those things, they're going to come up, and I think that's just keep them in your mind, keep them in. If somebody asks you how you're doing, I'm like, "Oh, I took this awesome hike the other day, and the beauty of God around me was so evident," right? And so just, there's so many things that you could do. And
Thank you, Daren. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, so this is something that I've been working on, again, looking at the political background and the challenges that perhaps we have in having these conversations. At least in this region, obviously around the world, you're going to have a different political landscape. But here we've had some challenge trying to identify common language that we can move forward. And so one thing that I like to point out is that the word conservative and the word conservation are only two letters different. So like at the root of the word itself, there's so much in common. And then to try to identify something that is perhaps well known and established among a certain political ideologies, take, for example, fiscal, looking at our fiscal resources and being conservative with our fiscal resources and not spend too much, not take too much, and be efficient and wise with what we do take, and then translating that to natural resources. The concept is the same: don't take too much, don't spend too much, and be efficient and wise with those natural resources that we do have. And so trying to identify the various, again, the underlying values and how they're manifest, and then find how we can shape the conversation using that existing understanding and value set.
Thank you so much. In just the few minutes we have left, perhaps we could turn it back to each of you for a final statement. There's so much that we didn't talk about. You all have such impressive bios. You've traveled internationally. You're deeply immersed in your fields, your leaders. Daren, you and I talked quite a bit about your work with the Navajo Nation. It's just so fascinating. So whatever you'd like to kind of end with, leave us with a challenge or maybe a message of hope. And we'll turn it to you guys and then back over to Mark. Sarah, we started with you at the beginning. Let's end with you. Do you want to take that question first?
You bet. So when I was thinking about this, thinking back to kind of the experiences perhaps that I've had along the way that have contributed to the work that I do now, and my connection with my faith, I recall a time when I grew up, I loved girls' camp. I was a leader when I was younger, and then later when I was a mom, I was fortunate to serve as the girls' camp director in our ward for 3 years. And just the sacred nature of that environment. Anyway, so I recall one time when we were up there and we had a campfire, and the girls had gone to bed, and I was monitoring the campfire as it died down. And it was quiet and it was peaceful, and it smells good. We've got the forest around you. And then it was a clear sky, and the stars were there and the dying embers. And I thought to myself, this is the perfect moment for the heavens to open and for me to have this transcendent spiritual experience. I'm ready. And I thought that this camp setting right there would be just perfect for it. And so I waited and waited, and nothing happened. And so it's interesting that I have this memory of nothing happening. and how pivotal that was for me to, again, reshape my perspective and how I approach life, and trying to celebrate the sacred in the everyday. And again, bring that concept of divinity to a more tangible present in my life. One of these days, I'm going to have that transcendent spiritual experience. But in the meantime, there's plenty of work, and there's plenty of divinity to experience in my day-to-day life. And so again, in this conversation with environment, we talk about going off to these amazing, beautiful places that we have, and I definitely encourage us all to do that. But at the same time, not everybody is privileged to take a trip to a national park, for example, and to reconnect with our natural environments where we live, in our neighborhoods, and perhaps connect and take a walk in our own neighborhoods and connect with those environments, those built environments that we have, and look at how we can contribute to healing within our own communities, both in the natural environment and within the people and the communities and our neighbors that we live by and serve every day.
Thank you, Sarah. That's great. That's a guiding principle for me too, is to see the divinity around me and any of the people around me, right? And the gospel does such a good job of instilling us with, with that appreciation of the divinity within us and the potential for each of us. That's really beautiful. I love this poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She says, "Earth's crammed with heaven and every common bush afire with God, but only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit round and pluck back berries." There is such beauty all around us in the people as well. And thank you for sharing that. Let's go to Daren, and then we'll end with Rachel.
So as Sarah was talking there, I was reflected back to an experience that I had around a campfire once, and I wanted to discuss kind of the same kind of thing. I've had the blessed opportunity to take students out in the field a lot. I remember once where I took a group of like 10 students from North Carolina all the way out to the Grand Canyon, and we drove around all the 5 national parks here in Utah, and I remember one night we were there, and this one student specifically who was, I knew they were atheists. They've talked to me about it many times, and they knew at the time I was a bishop, and he knew that, and he knew what I did, and so he asked me, he says, "How can you believe in a God?" Right? And we were sitting there around the campfire, and I was like, "You've been to all these places that we've been in the last couple of days," and I say, I can't believe that there's not one. I mean, there's the beauty that we see here, the things that he's given us, to me, is just amazing. And to me, it goes back to the scriptures a little bit. I'm going to read a quick scripture, and this is in Doctrine and Covenants 104. It's one of my favorite scriptures about stewardship, and you probably all have heard of this one before, but I'm going to specifically go to verse 14, and it says, the Lord stretched out the heavens and built the earth, my very handiwork, and all things therein are mine. And we as his stewards need to actually treat his work in the utmost respect. And I think that we need to try to help others to achieve that same respect and understand that same respect. And I just love the world around me, and I've loved it ever since I grew up in the Yellowstone area, and I've loved these things. I love the world, and I think that it's important for us to continually be the stewards that we should be.
Thank you, Daren. All right, Rachel, takeaways, a challenge for us.
I would say that I would start with the one and move outward. And what I mean with that is to start internally to keep that tenderness and awe of nature and that connection with God, to be still and know that he is God. And then to take it to the next step and to look at your own situation, your own knowledge, or a particular problem that you've noticed that's challenging you, either in talking to a certain group of people or a certain person, or communicating some of these important ideas, and learn about it, and then find new perspectives on addressing it. And then the third step would then be to take it another step further and to reach out to a community that you haven't worked with, either one that's working within the environmental cause, but it has taken a different angle or has a different perspective on it, learn from them and help them, or to reach out to that community that has been resistant to the urgency or the knowledge that we know of what needs to be done here, and find a way to connect with them. And so that you're nurturing that from both that connection that you have with nature and God, and that overarching sense of purpose, to what you do in your own life and how can you reach out to community. And I think that balance is what we need to be most effective.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you to all of you. Thank you to Sarah and Daren and Rachel. Our time is up. If we were all in person, we would have everyone give you a round of applause.